Hello, Education 523. Hope all is well. It's Dr. Allen here. Work's been great so far. Hopefully you're getting all the announcements, videos, and things like that for the class. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And we're going to jump right into everything. Oh, that's your assignment. That's what we're going to talk about here in a few minutes. One thing I want to make sure everyone knows, everyone's been really on top of things. So I'm not, hopefully you're getting some stuff out of the low-end discussions and videos and exploring some of the resources with Zen, the Zen project. I'm looking at my calendar right now. I'm recording this on Friday, January 28th. I just want to highlight a few things. Like I said, I try not to make these videos too long. I do want to let you know I will be out of the office from February 2nd to 4th next week. That's Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. I'm actually presenting in a conference. So if you need me, though, I will be still checking my email. I'll probably have a little announcement coming out telling everyone I'm out of the office, and it may not be as quick a turnaround, but I will still make sure that I get to the email at least once or twice a day just to make sure that I'm not too far behind, or if there's any type of emergencies or goofs on my part on Brightspace and such. With that being said, I'm gone. I want to look at a few other things here just for the week. Sorry, I'm making sure I haven't overlooked anything. Singing while I'm doing this. Here we go. You probably are like, what in the world is this guy doing? It's Friday. There's a little bit of snow out there. All right. Plus there's people outside my office. I'm just trying to refocus. A couple things though coming up for this week. One, we have discussion 3 that's going to be on low end, and I'll talk about that towards the end. You have another ed puzzle. The first ed puzzles were great. Some people had emailed and said that there were some missed questions. They were, I think I addressed this, but just in case, some of them I have to go in and look at your answers to give you credit. So if it says something like you scored 5 out of 10, but 5 of them were fill in the blank, it's not going to give you the extra credit until I go back. The last ones were great. The scores will all be in. We're going to talk about a couple of Supreme Court cases, but with the ed puzzle, I was going to do a video on monumental cases. I put one up on the Little Rock 9, which was a result of Brown versus Board of Education, maybe one of the most famous, definitely one of the most important Supreme Court cases of all time. I actually put a PowerPoint of famous educational Supreme Court cases. I might fly through those real quick if we have time at the end, and the PowerPoint is up if you want to take a look. But with no further ado, you have the ed puzzle, and you'll have the discussion 3, which I'll talk about, and we'll kind of go from there. And here we go. I'm going to pull this over. I'm not going to get too bogged down with Lowen a little bit too much this week. I did just want to point out a few things. If you read, when you're reading chapters 7 and 8, he gets into, I should probably change this, but I think even classrooms, I'm going to do that right now. Well, he does say textbooks. I'm going to keep it there. He gets into the concept that textbooks a lot of times don't use keywords such as, or words or phrases such as class structure, social class, lower class, inequality. And he says this is done with an intent because, the United States is always seen as the land of social mobility, and it will be acknowledging that some people aren't always recognized or might be struggling in life because of socioeconomic type reasons. Every time I've read this chapter, I always do think back, most of us probably in this class, I don't know where everyone lives, but most of us are probably from the Eastern Panhandle, I gather. And we don't experience the levels of poverty and financial woes in counties such as in the southern part of the state. I don't know if anyone's ever been to the southern part of West Virginia, but it is, there's parts that still do struggle with this. There's a lot of battles with Appalachia, job unemployment, things like that. It's the story of Appalachia, but I always do think of it a little bit when I'm doing this chapter. And also, I always remember this from my class when I did my graduate studies of this course. Actually, I read an older edition of this book. I remember there was a lot of discussion in our class. I was at WVU where we talked about how a lot of the issues in Appalachia are the same in a lot of inner cities and things like that, with schools being underfunded because of where they are and maybe not having a lot of power players in them, things like that. So basically what I'm getting to is textbooks a lot of times avoid these terms. And I think classrooms do to an extent, class structure, social class, lower class, inequality. They're things that, should we address or not? I'm going to talk about the discussion board. This actually gets into this, and again, I get into that, Lowen gets into that idea of social mobility. Also, I think a lot of teachers do recognize, it's a difficult topic to talk about sometimes because you don't want to embarrass students or get, sometimes I don't know how much everyone has taught or if anyone is actually a teacher in this class, but talking about financial issues is it's a sticky wicket in the classroom. I know I never particularly, I didn't do it a whole lot. I think it can put students in difficult positions. So it is something that might be one of the biggest issues in schools as far as funding and access to resources and things like that. But it's also one of the more difficult things to talk about. Heck, I think in this chapter, Lowen makes the point that if you ask the student what class they're in, almost everyone, 99.9% are going to say, well, I'm in middle class. Well, that could probably be a pretty big, span. Most students don't quite understand the concept of class history and growing up, just believing that, a lot of times I've heard students say this, and I've actually, talked to them about it, poor people deserve to be poor because this is the land of opportunity. And if it's given to you, you can do it. I'm not saying that's not true to an extent, but also, sometimes people do, as I mentioned earlier, have the ability to get to resources and access to different tools quicker or more readier, I guess that would be a word, than others. And that does, I think, sometimes put you at an advantage. I don't know if that would be debated too much. Also, I kind of took this right out of it and I put textbooks again, but even discussing immigration, I think that gets into this a little bit with the idea of class, where a lot of times textbooks and even classroom materials get into the idea of when we're talking about immigration in the classroom. A lot of the same arguments that are made up here, I think, apply to immigration. And a lot of times when teaching materials get into things, a lot of times it's celebrating immigration, which is obviously it should be celebrated. But also there's an acknowledgement. There's a lot of people that have come here that are struggling and impoverished, and what can be done? Is it fair that they're at a disadvantage because they've come from a different place and they're living in an area that, again, may not have access to resources or fundings like other places do? So I'm not really going to get into chapter 8 a little bit. I know he gets into some important points, but it's more foreign policy related. So I don't know how much that I think it connects to the class, but I'm not going to get bogged down and make this a super long video. I do just want to point out, Lowen does talk about a lot of foreign policy decisions that, we don't talk about in classrooms. And I think it does connect to some things that might relate to some students. He gets into issues in Guatemala, Iran, Lebanon, Zaire, Cuba. My sister lives in Florida, and any issue with Cuba is always, hotly contested. She lives right in Miami and Chile. But again, I'm not going to get bogged down with this too much, just mainly because what I want you to kind of think about for this class's purposes is the issue of, how should we use, or should we use, talk about class structure and lower class inequality, social class. Is there a way to do it in the classroom and discuss things with students and put them at ease and not make people feel uncomfortable, and, and maybe try to address some of these problems? Lowen gets into the point that, maybe one reason these things aren't talked about is just because it has a Marxist vibe to it. And especially when a lot of these textbooks were written, there was an influence, there's the Red Scare, there's McCarthyism, there's things like that. So maybe that has some aspect to it. I know everyone's looked at Zen at this point because there was an assignment last week, but that's one thing why a lot of people don't like the Zen materials for anything, because there's like that he's been accused of having like a lot of socialist Marxist type vibes. And I don't think that's the goal with what Lowen's trying to do. I think he's a little bit of an equal opportunity hater, so to speak. I think he just feels like, there are definitely differences in how funding is distributed and how we handle things, and especially in education. So, and not only how we get it, but how we teach it. So that's just a little bit of a Lowen overview. I did want to hit on one thing here. I will post that up. Put this up. I'm not going to run through every one of these. I might hit them quick. This PowerPoint is up if you want to check it out. But I put some landmark Supreme Court cases that I thought related to race, gender, student rights, things like that, if you want to check them out. some of these names I'll probably butcher, and forgive me. Some of them I know better than others. Hazelwood and Kuhlmeyer. This just gets into one related to split. A principal would not allow something to be published in a school paper, and it gets into First Amendment rights. Again, that's one that I think is important. I don't know how much it directly influences this class. I guess student rights is a good connection, but if you want to check that out, that's a good one. This is one on smoking, and it kind of gets in there. That's a Fourth Amendment right. Check that out. There's a couple I really want to hammer in a little bit. Seeing speech at an assembly. Again, does that get into First Amendment rights? This one I thought kind of really connects a lot to what we're doing, especially because you might have, it's Tinker versus Des Moines, which is, students wore black armbands protesting the Vietnam War, and they were suspended. The decision was a student does not shed his rights at the door at a school. So I might go back into what we were talking about, what you can talk in class and what you can't. Black armbands to protest the Vietnam War can be worn since they are not disruptive. And that was the basic concept. Again, a First Amendment right. Emory Gott, that was sent when someone was sent to a juvenile detention center for an alleged obscene phone call. No lawyer, no witnesses. Basically, this gets into the concept of, and sorry, that thing, I don't know if I can move it over, I can't. Juveniles are all allowed due process as well as adults. 14th Amendment, again, how it influences schools. This is licensure. I'm not going to get it. Here's a big one. This is obviously one I think most people are familiar with, but just in case, I wanted to spend a second or two on this. This was the Plessy versus Ferguson case, which is actually one of the more infamous, I guess, cases in the Supreme Court history. As it says there, Plessy was 1/8 of African descent, sat in a white-only car, would not move when asked. It established the concept, you've probably heard this before, but the concept of separate but equal in public facilities. This is basically something that is endorsing segregation. It's a major one. It's always connected to what we're going to talk about here in a few minutes. The Brown versus Board of Education case. This is a 14th Amendment thing with separate facilities. Actually, this is a very famous thing. I have one of these, this whole set of posters in my classroom, but that's not about me. But the Plessy versus Ferguson case was it was actually late 19th century. So this is actually going to be kind of standard law. Basically, I'm going to double check the date and I'll put it up on the board. I believe it is 1898. But now, you know what? Instead of me posting it, why don't I go to the Google machine? The beauty of this, Plessy v. Ferguson, just to double check. I thought it was 1898. 1896. I'm sorry, but I'm glad I checked. This is the concept of separate but equal. And like I say, that is going to be the way of the United States for 50 plus years. And I mentioned it, and these two a lot of times go hand in hand. This is Brown versus Board of Education. Actually, I think it gets into Board of Education of Topeka. But Mr. Brown wanted his daughter to attend a neighborhood school. She was African-American and the school was for whites. Schools were desegregated, separate. Schools were unequal. And basically what they're getting into is, and I'm taking it for granted everyone's familiar with Plessy, and I probably should, just in case, that the whole concept of separate but equal was there could be two schools, one for African-American students, one for white students and such. The schools would be the same. They would have the same access to materials, to facilities, resources and such. Of course, they weren't. There's no such thing as separate but equal. Why even have them separate if they were going to be equal? It overturned Plessy versus Ferguson, Brown versus Board of Education. Actually, very famous lawyer, the NAACP was involved in this. It was Thurgood Marshall. That's one of the lawyers that was involved with this. Of course, later will be on the Supreme Court. But the big thing with Brown versus Board of Education, integrated schools. Here's another one, Swan versus the CMS Board of Education. This basically said, he was saying that the school was not integrated, even though Board versus Education said that it had to be. Again, it was further endorsement of Brown versus Board of Education. I'll double check the state. I'm actually stalling a little bit. I thought it was in Georgia or Alabama, but I'll double check. And then throwing a little bit of a I already missed 1898, so I'll double check that. But basically another further endorsement. We get into Matsu versus the United States was one where basically they get into people of Japanese descent being sent to internment camps. He was saying that it was not constitutional. As it says there, justices ruled for the United States, saying that times of national hardship, which would be World War II, and extreme times can allow individuals to be taken away. So this gets into the whole idea of the internment camps for Japanese citizens during the 1940s. If we're in West Virginia, I think the closest one here was actually in Arkansas. There was many more out west. And actually, there's some good materials on this. The one gentleman that was on Star Trek, George Tataki, I hope I'm saying his name correctly. He actually did a graphic novel on one of these, and I know there's some stuff in resources, but this is an overlooked section, I think, of our history, and a group of people who actually, students were taken out of the schools from their friends and people from their homes to put in these camps. There's a Japanese internment camp right there. This is one, again, with multiculturalism, I do think it falls into. This is Eagle versus Vattel. I think Vattel? No, it's Vattel. Basically, it was the school board was requiring students to pray at the beginning of every day. The decision was that students cannot be forced to pray every day. It gets into the issue of the separation of church and state. So this is one that actually comes up a lot. I thought there was another case that was coming up on this, but just to kind of let you know, the regent of the University of California, a white student was not accepted in a school and several minority students were. Basically, it was saying students can't use admission quotas and admit students solely based on race. The 14th Amendment. I just heard on the radio the other day, I think there's something coming up with Harvard related to Asian American students, and I guess the acceptance rates and whether they're held to a higher standard at Harvard or not. This gets into things, and I don't believe I have it on this PowerPoint. There was another case related to the University of Michigan and of course, affirmative action. So this is a complicated issue, and this actually gets more into higher ed than it does K through 12, but I just kind of included one here. So those are some cases. I know that was a little quick, but again, I don't want to make this overly long. The PowerPoint is up, and of course, you are welcome to check out some of these court cases on your own. Just to let you know, there is an Edpuzzle up, and it's on the Little Rock 9. That was a group of 9 students when they were integrating Little Rock High School in Arkansas. And that's a big one because that's where the Brown versus Board of Education decision and the segregation wasn't going to be an easy process in some areas in some states. The National Guard actually ends up being brought in. And actually, that's an interesting school. I might try to find a documentary. I watched something on it probably 10, 12 years ago, but it was Little Rock High School. Now it's kind of a chic high school because it's so historically important. And they were saying they weirdly have some of the same issues now because the school, it isn't segregated, obviously, but it's a very much a higher income students are there. So it's hard. It's almost hard to get into, if that makes sense, even though it's a public school. I don't know if things have changed, but when I watched it, it's district and an upper class. So it's kind of segregated now because it's chic to go there. So a lot of people who might have higher incomes want that connection for their children to get school. So it's more of a socioeconomic segregation than it is a racial segregation now. But anyway, I'll see if I can find that documentary. It was on HBO many years ago. It was kind of interesting, but that was Little Rock High School. That is the Edpuzzle. I haven't labeled these yet. With that being said, this week, big thing is discussion and Edpuzzle. Don't forget, you do have the action plan assignment that is on here, and it's still up here if you need it. I'll make sure to put that on there. And the Edpuzzle, I'll link that on there in the grades. Everything should be caught up on grades here in the very near future. I'm trying to keep up with them. It's been a little bit of a busy week. And with all that being said, I hope you're having a great week. I'm just going to go ahead and sign off. I think I've probably talked long enough. I really do try to keep these around 20 minutes if I can. And isn't that what the research says? Try not to go over 10 to 15 minutes, and I still go 20. So thank you all very much, and I'll talk to you later.